This was their vacation of a lifetime. And it is sad to think that, what they saw as this adventurous moment to experience surfing in this beautiful beach town ended up, losing their lives as a result of it.
An Instagram-worthy vacation ends in tragedy when a California man and two of his friends are brutally murdered while on a surfing trip.
Mexico is really beautiful by these beaches, and the surfing there is so amazing that people are kind of willing to do it, even if parts of Mexico you know not to go into because the drug cartel is so bad. They're still very much willing to go into specific areas.
What started as a missing persons investigation quickly escalated, with investigators now revealing a puzzling motive in the triple homicide.
But it's not that unusual to maybe think of how that is, because if you have, again, a weapon, a gun, those kind of situations can escalate very quickly, can become very dangerous.
All this just weeks before one victim was set to be married.
They had their life cut short. It's very, very tragic.
3 men went along for the trip, brothers Jack and Callum Robinson and their friend Jack Carter Rhoad. The Robinson brothers are from Australia, but Callum moved to the States in college when he played lacrosse at Stevenson University. While Jack Robinson was based out of Victoria, Australia, both Callum and Jack Carter Rhoad were living in San Diego. That brings us to their spring surfing trip, spent in Baja California along the Pacific Ocean in western Mexico. Callum posted multiple photos of the trip to his Instagram, showing the group surfing, enjoying the beach, and listening to music. But then on April 27th, the group went radio silent. The real red flags came when the trio failed to show up for their Airbnb reservations in Rosarito. As attorney and legal analyst Dina Saig-Dahl explains, one of the victims' mothers first sounded the alarm.
I mean, honestly, the first step in this situation was the mother put it on a Facebook group, trying to say, hey, I can't find my sons. And she was hoping that maybe fellow surfers in the area would know more about why they didn't check into their Airbnb. And then after that point, you have to start involving the authorities, not only the Mexican authorities, but because one of them is an American, the U.S. authorities got involved. And I'm sure she also asked for the Australian ambassador in Mexico to get involved to help coordinate the investigation of what exactly where they were. They didn't know yet if they were still alive or not, but to try to find out details and try to find them.
Dina says the involvement of American and Australian authorities probably expedited the search.
If anything, it probably helped the investigation because you had that many more resources at their disposal. I mean, obviously, I would think that because of the close connection the U.S. already has to Mexico, not only physically close, but the many alliances the two countries had, that the U.S. probably had more resources to give to the investigation. But I think it's only helpful to have the Australian ambassador and any Australian resources to kind of aid with that investigation as well. According to reports, the FBI was involved in the investigation, and that is not uncommon. We've seen anytime, because we have seen situations in the past where Americans have been involved in kidnappings or murders in Mexico, and the FBI does get involved because you're a U.S. citizen, and again, because of the proximity to the physical U.S. borders, it makes it much easier for the FBI to be involved. And because of the alliances between the two countries, Mexico allows for the FBI to kind of cross into its borders and aid the investigation. And so we saw that happen. The FBI definitely was involved in the searching for these men from the beginning.
And what do we think the investigation would look like? Going through cell phone data to see where their phones last pinged or last text messages, things like that?
Yes, and it sounded like they knew quite a bit about where they were likely to be located because they were in communication with their family. Their family knew where they were going. The fact that they even knew when they were supposed to check into an Airbnb. The family knew quite a bit about the itinerary and where they were going. And I think that was quite helpful to them because if they didn't know when they were supposed to check in, they wouldn't have known when they got missing. And it's true that the bodies were already starting to decompose when they found them. So if much longer had gone by, it might have been even harder to locate them. And so it was, I think, as it turned out, very helpful that these men had communicated with their families so much detail about their trip.
But the search for the men ended in tragedy when their bodies were discovered in a well about 50 feet underground. Along with them, a fourth body that had already begun decomposing. Mexican authorities say the well was in a rural area that was difficult to get to. It took first responders multiple hours to recover the bodies. Investigators are now revealing the motive in their murders, and it's not what you'd expect. And if we fast forward to when the bodies are recovered in kind of a rural area, dropped down a well, and investigators determined they had been shot and killed. But they also talked about a motive in the case, that the three suspects had wanted the tires off the vehicle that the three surfers had been driving. What do you make of that reason to shoot and murder three people?
It's so tragic. And something that is we have seen unfortunately before. I mean, you hear of situations where somebody is trying to steal somebody's purse, and that ends up escalating into being shot. It's kind of that situation where whenever there's like a weapon involved, right, from the assailants, it could escalate really quickly. And you're right that it sounded like not only was it supposed to be a carjacking, but specifically the tires is what these suspects allegedly wanted. And the men were resisting in some way, and that escalated. And obviously we weren't there to see exactly how, but it's not that unusual to maybe think of how that is, because if you have, again, a weapon, a gun, those kind of situations can escalate very quickly, can become very dangerous. And it is so tragic. It sounds like each of them were shot in their head. So not even like they were running away or, so it was, it's an intentional killing, and very, very tragic.
Three suspects are now in custody. Brothers Christian Alejandro Garcia, Jesus Gerardo Garcia Cota, and Jesus's wife, Ari Giselle Garcia Cota. Authorities say their motive was the tires on the vehicle the three tourists were driving. According to investigators, it appears that the brothers and their friend resisted the carjacking, and it ended in their murders. How did they come to the determination that these three surfers were killed for this reason? Could it have been confessions by the suspects or just by raw evidence that they're finding there?
I think the detail that we're getting, the fact that it was for the tires specifically, I don't see how they could have gotten that any other way than from one of those suspects. And there was evidently the suspects are two men, one woman, and one of the two men has a history of violence and arrests. And so you could maybe conceive of a scenario where possibly the woman was less involved or the other man was less involved, and one of them is cooperating and giving more details. It does seem like one of them has to be cooperating for them to get such specific. I mean, we could all guess that there was maybe a carjacking involved. The fact that both the car and them went missing at the same time and nothing else was stolen. But the tires, the details about the tires seems to have come from only one of those three.
This is a Law&Crime legal alert. Google Incognito tracked users' browsing data without their knowledge. Mass Tort Alliance, one of our legal sponsors, is helping users file for compensation due to Google misleading the privacy of their Incognito browser. If you've used Google Incognito anytime since 2016, you can start your claim in less than 10 questions at incognitoclaims.com/LCnews. About 4 miles from the well, investigators found abandoned tents, a burned-up pickup truck, and some of the victims' phones. Investigators also say Ari Giselle Garcia Cota had one of the victims' phones when she was arrested. And if we're talking about the suspects, the female suspect in this situation, some of the reports I've seen show that she had one of the victims' cell phones with her when she had been arrested or detained. How is that something that she would be able to combat? Why else would she have this murdered surfer's cell phone?
Yeah, if that reporting turns out to be correct, it's a very surprising detail why she would keep and hold on to that kind of evidence. I think I also heard that one of the cell phones was burned, which seems more likely that you would want to dispose of it, because that's very incriminating evidence, and also a way to frankly locate the suspects, because it's not that hard to try to find out the location of cell phones these days, especially because I'm sure the family members would have helped in any way to help them give the passwords to the investigations of these cell phones. So it's possible in that kind of a situation. I mean, it's really only, you're kind of trying to guess how somebody is thinking, but maybe she didn't realize she still had it, or she was kind of not okay with how things developed, and she wanted this because she was planning on turning the other two in. It's hard to say, but that could be why, if she were the one who was corroborating, because they had such strong evidence against her.
We mentioned a fourth body recovered in the well, along with the Robinsons and Jack Carter Rhoad. Authorities believe the decomposed remains belonged to a rancher who'd been reported missing 2 weeks earlier. Investigators also say the rancher owned the property where they found the well, and the suspects had likely visited it before the 3 tourists were recovered. Another interesting aspect of this case is when these 3 men were recovered down in that well, a fourth body was recovered there as well. Investigators say that it had been decomposing for longer, and I believe they determined it was a rancher whose property was in the area. How does this connect to the case at all?
It's very interesting, because possibly one of those 3 people are connected with that fourth body. How did they know that well was there? Why did they think that was a good place to dispose of a body, except for the fact that they had done it before? I mean, that's the most likely scenario, that one of those 3 are connected with those fourth, or that area just happened to be known as, a place that it was isolated and a good place to hide, and maybe they knew of the person who is connected with the fourth body. But I don't think it's a complete coincidence that these 3 bodies happen to be disposed of at the same place, a fourth one. It was they were either connected to it, or they probably knew somebody who was connected to that fourth one.
And while it hasn't been confirmed yet, organized crime could be involved in the murders.
I mean, cartel violence, as we know, has been escalating in Mexico. We saw it in the tourist destinations over in Cancun and Tulum a few years ago, which was kind of shocking there. And then here we have it in this Ensenada, this tourist surfer town. To have any violence there is also very surprising. As of now, there isn't any known connection to the cartel with one of these 3. It's possible that might come out, but it's also possible that when you have like such a dysfunctional governing entity as the Mexican government is right now, that they can't control the cartel violence, it just allows for more violence in general, allows for more vigilante type violence, even if it's not part of any organized criminal organization.
You mentioned how this area is somewhat of a tourist destination, which is why they were there, to go surfing. Should this deter other people from vacationing to areas like this, that violent crime could be on the rise?
I think that it always does. I mean, I'm here in Los Angeles. I know people who have driven down there to go surfing for years. It's very common. And it's not something that people are necessarily afraid of, because most tourist destinations, I mean, Mexico is really beautiful by these beaches, and the surfing there is so amazing that people are kind of willing to do it, even if parts of Mexico not to go into because the drug cartel is so bad. They're still very much willing to go into specific areas. I mean, Cabo, which is not super far from that area, is a huge, thriving tourist destination. So Americans and people around the world tend to still go where they think they are safe because of these tourist destinations. And for the most part, like the vast majority of them are safe and nothing happens. But we see much more crime and deaths. And I think over 500 Americans are still missing in Mexico. So these things do happen. People are just willing to still go, because for the most part, it won't be you. But in a situation like this, I mean, these will happen more likely there, unfortunately.
In a statement, the Baja California State Attorney General said, quote, It should be noted that the rapid intervention of the police allowed 3 people to be under investigation, and currently an arrest warrant was obtained before the criminal courts of the State Superior Court of Justice for the crime of forced disappearance of people. Dina says all those legal proceedings will take place in Mexico.
They would be going through the justice system in Mexico because these are, Mexican citizens, and the crime occurred in Mexico. U.S. would have jurisdiction over it if one of the killers was a United States citizen. If a United States citizen kills another United States citizen in Mexico, let's say, or a foreign country, then the U.S. could still have, jurisdiction over that. You have personal jurisdiction because you're a U.S. citizen. But here, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be 3 Mexican citizens. And in that case, the U.S. doesn't have any kind of jurisdiction because the crime didn't occur within the boundaries of the U.S., nor did the assailants have any citizenship in the United States.
A GoFundMe page has been created for both the Robinson brothers and Jack Carter Rhoad, who was set to be married just this summer.
It's so sad seeing his story and the brothers' stories. You really, they had their life cut short. And for something as simple as like a vacation of the lifetime. I think that was one of the moms of the 2 Australian brothers said this was their vacation of a lifetime. And it is sad to think that, what they saw as this adventurous moment to experience surfing in this beautiful beach town ended up, losing their lives as a result of it. It's very, very tragic.
From here, the Baja California State's Attorney General's office is working with the FBI and both the United States and Australian consulates. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.